little bit about what a relation is, let's look a little deeper at this idea of the two variables in a relation. Because it's important to understand that one of them is going to be designated as the independent variable, and the other is going to be called the dependent variable. So again, relation is some relationship between two variables, two quantities that are changing, and that has some connection between them. Like, let's say, for example, I asked you, okay, I'm going to plant a seed today. How tall will my plant be? And you could say, well, I can't answer that for you until you give me a little more specifics. Like, if you're asking me how tall will your plant be by the end of the day today, well, it's still going to be underground. One day from now, one day after germination, after it starts growing, it won't quite be an inch tall, but it'll start to sprout a little bit. It grows very fast. After 2 days, it'll be a bit bigger than that, and in 3 days, it'll be a little bit bigger than that. Probably around day 5, it'll be about 4 inches tall, and then on day 6, after you've planted it, it'll be about 6 inches tall. Day 7, it'll be about 9 inches tall. Day 8, it'll be about 13 inches tall. So the relation is between the number of days after germination, which you see here showing up on our x-axis, and the height of the plant in inches, which we're showing here on our y-axis. Now, it's no coincidence that the number of days here is showing up on your x-axis and the height is showing up on your y-axis, because when we're showing relations in the Cartesian plane, we always represent what we'll call the independent variable, and we'll talk more about that in a second, on the x-axis, and the dependent variable on the y-axis. We do this a lot in science especially, and so that's why in math we try and model that as well. So what is this talk about an independent variable and a dependent variable? It's easier to understand if you start by thinking about the word dependent, right? You might have heard the word dependent. Dependent essentially means that you rely on something else, right? If you say, yeah, you can depend on me, you're telling somebody, yeah, you can rely on me and I'll be there for you. So the way it works is the height here depends on how many days have passed. It's not that we look and see how tall the plant is and then, make the entire spinning of the Earth's axis decide how many days have to have passed for it to be that height. I mean, it is true you can often tell how long it's been there by looking at the height, but the height is going to, like, the plant is going to grow as time passes. It's not because the plant is this tall that time has passed. No, time passes and the plant grows. It's our understanding of basic causality. And the more days go by, the higher the plant is. So when we have these two variables, we always decide that one of them is the dependent variable, one's the independent variable. And the dependent one, we say which of these two numbers, height of the plant or number of days, is going to kind of depend on the other one. Which one of these two numbers watches what happens with the other one, right? The plant's height is going to watch time pass, and that's how it's going to grow. Really, this only gets to become easier when you see some more examples to make sense of it. So let's go find another example in your textbook here. Let's head down to this page here. This is page 10. Yeah, page 10 in your unit book. And let's say we're not talking about plants growing anymore. Well, we're talking about fruits here. We're talking about apples, right? Let's say you're trying to decide how much to charge a customer who's buying apples from you. They're buying pounds and pounds of apples. And they come up to the counter and they got a basket full of apples, and they'd say, all right, I'm ready to pay for these. So you say, okay, well, how many pounds of apples do you have? And they say, well, it looks like I got 6 here. So because they've got 6 apples, that decides that you're going to charge them $12. That's why the cost in dollars here, showing up on the y-axis, that's the dependent variable. This number changes as the number of pounds changes. And this number down here, the number of pounds, that decides the bill that you're paying in dollars, right? If I have 0 pounds of apples, then I'm not going to charge the guy anything at all. If he's got 10 pounds, then I'm going to charge him 20, right? And really, if you look closely, and you guys will probably pick up on this, you'll see that the cost in dollars, look closely, is always 2 times the number of pounds. Right? 6 is 2 times 3. That's this point here. This point here, if I have 4 pounds, it's going to be charging $8. 5 pounds is $10. This number that I'm charging in dollars is always twice the number of pounds. But the cost depends on the number of pounds. The number here, the variable that depends on the other one, that's your dependent variable. And the other number, the one that isn't the dependent variable, is your independent variable. Another way you can think of it is the word independent. When you think of that, that's somebody who leads, right? That's somebody who's out in front. And if you think of x and y, x always comes before y. X comes along, then y follows after it, right? So x is the independent one. He goes ahead. He decides what's going to happen. And y follows after x. He's the one who depends on what happens with x. Okay, let's look at some other examples here. If you look at this here, you could think of a relation where your cell phone bill, and this is assuming you don't have a flat plan. Let's say you've got a usage-based cell phone plan. Then the total amount you would pay on your cell phone bill would depend on something else. It would depend on, we could type it in here, if I could get this to work, you would depend on, let me pop this up here, the total number of minutes you'd use, right? Now, most people don't have usage-based cell phone plans anymore, but for this example, I think you understand. Let's think of a relation where the independent variable is the amount of gas you have in your car. Now, the amount of gas you have in your car, what would depend on the amount of gas you have in your car? There's a few answers to this, but one would be let me put this down here. If the amount of gas you have in your car decides the total distance you can travel before refueling. Let's look at this. Your math grade, that's something that can change, right? Your math grade is going to depend on other stuff that happens. What is the other stuff that happens that decides your math grade? There's actually a few relations that could make sense here. Some of you guys might have different answers than the one I'm going to suggest, but I would suggest that your math grade is going to depend on how well you study, how well you complete your work, right? There's a number of other variables you could imagine, but these things decide your math grade, right? How much money you made this week at your job. Well, again, we're trying to think of an example that would work. There's more than one possible answer that could work at this. But you could imagine the total money you make during a week at your job could depend on, like if you're a salesman who works on commission, it could depend on number of sales you made. Or it could be instead something like number of hours you worked, right? Depending on what kind of a job you might have. The amount of time it takes you to drive somewhere. If we're thinking this is a dependent variable, what would it depend on? The time it takes you to drive somewhere would depend on the total distance you need to travel. Right? This is the thing that this over here in this column, all these examples in this column are the ones that decide the quantity over here. If this distance gets longer, then the time it takes you to drive there will get bigger, right? So it's always the independent variable on this side that makes this other quantity happen. This number here is always watching this variable here. This variable is watching this variable. Your math grade is watching how well you complete your work, right? How much money you made this week is going to watch. It's going to depend on the sales you made or the hours you worked. This is the whole idea between dependent variable and independent variable. This is always something that gets determined by the independent variable.